Awesome. So welcome everyone to Metagov seminar. Today is Wednesday, January 21st, and we are very excited to welcome today Cecilia Rikap. Um, I came across Cecilia's work online and then was messaging with her. She wrote a paper on dynamics of corporate governance beyond ownership in AI, and I was very interested in the framing that she provides and a lot of the research that she brings together because I know that these are areas that many of us here in Metagov follow and are closely studying and interested in. But I really loved specifically her framework around intellectual monopolies. And yeah, just really seeing that as a lens through which to understand power in corporate governance and power kind of beyond just money, power beyond just ownership. I mean, it literally is called beyond ownership, but some of the other ways that power can kind of seep out. And so I read the paper and was just really thrilled to invite her, and then got to actually meet her at a recent event in New York, the European Digital Sovereignty event, which was really awesome. I can share information about that, but then we got to talking more, and we became, yeah, connected in a deeper way. So thank you so much, Cecilia, for coming and presenting with us. We're thrilled to have you. And we'll have your presentation followed by a Q&A that I'll help facilitate. So if folks have questions, send them in chat throughout, or we'll use the raise hand feature at the end of your presentation to field those questions. So thank you so much, and I'll pass it over to you.
Okay, amazing. For 1 second, you were frozen and everyone was frozen, which means that I was with the connectivity issues. So just to let you know that if that happens, probably it will just be a second and just let me know and I can go back and repeat what I was saying. So thanks, Val, for the introduction. Thanks for having me here. I'm going to go very briefly now into my presentation directly. And as Val was saying, for one the perhaps distinctive part of my way of looking at big tech companies and concentrated power in tech is that I don't see it as completely detached from dynamics of corporate power that we can see in other industries. And this is a bit of what the intellectual monopoly framework is trying to bring to the fore. So I will go first into some very simple conceptualization about it, and then I will move more into the age of AI and why although companies like Amazon, Microsoft, and Google are intellectual monopolies, just like a big pharma, a company like Toyota or Nestle or Coca-Cola or IKEA. At the same time, they are different, and why that matters. And why at the same time, and I think this is something that I'm also particularly interested in showing with my research, why when we think about how these companies, for instance, control today's public arena, so social media, social networks, or why when we look at these companies sitting on the front row of the inauguration day around a year ago, we're just looking at the tip of the iceberg of the ways in which they are actually controlling beyond ownership huge portions of global capitalism, with of course some exceptions. And I will not be discussing here much about China. Happy to also jump into that in the discussion part. But just to say that also Chinese big tech can be seen as an example of intellectual monopoly. So what do I mean when I say an intellectual monopoly? And here, I always like to start by presenting one of these like posters from visual capitalists with the largest companies in market capitalization, because it clearly shows us that here we have basically two groups of companies. The largest one, actually, and don't lose yourself in the colors. The colors are the countries, and I'm not going to speak about countries, but about, in a way, what drives the power of these companies. What's the source of these companies' power that explain why they are in the top 50 in market capitalization? And basically, here I see two groups. Some of these companies base their power on the systematic extraction of nature, and you have Saudi Aramco as a clear example there, but there are a few others. And then most of the companies here will be what I describe as an intellectual monopoly. So the source of their power will be their systematic capture of different types of intangibles. And systematic means also continuous, is an ongoing dynamic process. These are not one-time innovators. And what they are constantly doing is capturing pieces of knowledge, data, even crafting narratives that they turn into their intangible assets. And this idea of assets here matters because basically the goal is not simply to sell the data, but is to capture value constantly, permanently from society by controlling that data, by having sometimes exclusive access or by controlling who access to different types of knowledge, of data, of narratives, and how. So it's a way in which they systematically monetize their capture of different forms of intangibles. And I try to see this capture also as intertwined. So it's not that we will see, let's say, companies that just capture data, companies that just capture scientific knowledge, or others that are just manipulating narratives. They do all the things at once and all intertwine and reinforcing, and one reinforces each other. And I can then give you examples of that. But one important dynamic, I'm an economist by training, so I will say a few things that are related to economics here and there, but I will also try to keep it more general. But one important consequence of having the same companies always capturing co-developed knowledge, and I will come back to this idea of co-develop, co-produce in a second, but one of the effects of having the same companies constantly transforming intangibles into their assets is that we can see them as sustained and proactive rentiers. A typical landowner will be just waiting to cash the ground rent. But here, if the company just waits to cash money from the knowledge that it has captured and turn into its asset, it will soon be outpaced by other companies. So it needs to be constantly investing in research and development, in marketing. It needs to be constantly investing also in a way creating a periphery of actors, of satellite actors that will be contributing to the production of knowledge for the ultimate benefit of the leading corporation. And here I want to just add this, because if someone can define an intellectual monopoly, this is Peter Thiel. Because Peter Thiel really understands what the business is about when it comes to profiting at the expense of society. And basically what he's saying here is that the company that succeeds is the company that is always having the last breakthrough, or at least the last breakthrough for a long time. And basically the strategy is that no one can ever catch up. So this idea of companies that are trying to catch up, of all the startups that are in the quote unquote ecosystem, basically is just a crafted narrative, because all those startups ultimately are there just to create value for the ultimate benefit of the company that is sitting at the core, or the companies in plural. So we end up having a structure where in principle we have a lot of independent companies, and you can think of initial examples with the case of global value chains. You have a leading corporation that outsources different steps of the production process to other companies. But the result is that those profiting the most are still the leading corporations, those that are controlling the global value chain. And by saying that they control the global value chain, what I'm trying to emphasize here is that even though they will not be owning the means of production, they will not be directly hiring all the people that will be working in that value chain, they will still be able to dictate who is doing what and how, and who knows what and how. A similar process takes place when you think of how a franchising model works or how a platform works. And it's not just a matter of how leading corporations like those that I was showing you before control the production of different things, but among these different things that they control, they also control the production of knowledge, and they control it beyond their own R&D laboratories in what with other colleagues we describe as corporate innovation systems that, as I will explain in 1 second, can be thought of as integrated by several actors. They are all together co-producing knowledge. And this co-production of knowledge can be, again, of different types. And we can include here also the production of narratives, the production of data, which leads us to think of almost everyone in our society participating to some extent in the corporate innovation system. But then this co-created knowledge becomes the property of a leading corporation, a multinational corporation, a corporate power, what I would describe as an intellectual monopoly that will not simply appropriate and sometimes may not even need to appropriate, but will definitely turn that into its asset. So we'll make money out of it. You know, universities, for instance, have a lot of patents, but they don't make money usually out of those patents. This means that they appropriated knowledge, they have the property rights over that piece of knowledge, but they are not capable of transforming that property into a rent-bearing asset because they are not making any money by appropriating that knowledge. This is why the difference between appropriation and assetization matters. And it also helps us understand why sometimes these companies, when they come from the tech sector, they will be putting pieces of their software in open source as a way to create these satellite companies, this periphery, this turbulent periphery of many other companies that will be ultimately creating value for, in part, for the benefit of the intellectual monopoly. So here, in the case of the software put in open source, there is no property over that piece of software, actually. By definition, it has been put in open source, and that implies that it will no longer be owned, let's say, by Google or Microsoft, but still, by putting that piece of software in open source, these companies will be able to capture value that is produced connecting or related to that piece of open source software. This just as an example of the different ways in which these companies control the production of knowledge beyond ownership. So when we move directly to see this dynamic for the case of big tech companies, of course, I'm not claiming here that these companies are not doing internal research and development. They are. They have huge R&D laboratories and in plural, each of leading big tech companies has many research and development spaces. And in particular, they even have these like large departments. In the case of Amazon, for instance, they have this Amazon Grand Challenges division with people that are thinking long term, but always connected to the business. In the case of Google, after they acquired DeepMind, they kept DeepMind somehow detached from Google as a corporate structure, and they did it on purpose to give the sense of more leeway and space to develop research and keep on the spirit in a way of and not only a startup, but also to some extent even a freer space like a university. So of course they have all these internal dynamics in which they are producing research and development. And very early on, as you can see here on the slide, they were already focused on AI. This comes from, these are text mining keywords. So I use a text mining algorithm to identify what were the most prominent topics that were covered in the scientific publications of Google, Amazon, and Microsoft between 2014 and 2019. So way before the AI hype and so on and so forth. And you can see that these companies were already completely focused on machine learning, in particular deep neural networks and so on, which are the basis on which then they started focusing more on generative AI and so on. But so again, this is part of the story. But this research that they were developing here already back then was not developed exclusively by Amazon, Microsoft, and Google, which are the examples here. And the same is something that we could be saying of big pharma companies or leading corporations from other sectors. And before I get into how they control networks of co-production of knowledge, let me just emphasize one thing that I will not discuss in this presentation, but we can totally discuss it in the Q&A if you're interested in, is how they are also controlling narratives and regulation. So part of the work that I'm doing now is also focused on this, on showing how part of their control of intangibles can be extended to the control of the social sciences and humanities research about how AI needs to be regulated or not. And more often than not, we see the CEOs of the company saying things like this: yes, we should regulate AI, but without stifling innovation and things along the lines, which end up, of course, influencing and to a great deal what those in political power end up doing. But what I want to focus on is how they are controlling digital beyond ownership. And why is it that their control of the research beyond ownership in their specific field matters so much? Why is it that we are all the time talking about big tech and not about big pharma, which, for instance, as an example, which, as I was saying a few minutes ago, operate pretty much in the same way also as a knowledge predator, capturing knowledge co-produced with others. So let me give you some empirics about this. And on purpose, I'm going to show them small because I really don't want us to get lost in the details. But here I moved a bit forward in time, and I'm not just looking at the companies specifically, but I'm looking at the whole network of research presented at the top 14 AI conferences between 2018 and 2020. And what I wanted to look at here was where big tech were placed. And they are in many places, but among all these places, there are two that are the most important ones, which are the two key most central nodes of this map, which basically shows relations between organizations that are based on their co-authorship of the papers that they were presenting in the conferences. And at the heart, you see both Microsoft and Alphabet. So this means that these companies have a capacity to influence the research agenda way beyond the direct co-authorships that they are establishing. Being at the center of the network that also represents the frontier of our research field means that they have the largest capacity to influence what questions are relevant, what methods are relevant. And of course, in these convenings, they were not saying, this is the model, here you have all the code, here you have all the data that we were using to train the model, and so on. They are just giving more top level or abstract or less detailed presentations. So in a way, yes, one could still say that they are sharing part of the knowledge, but they are strategically sharing pieces of knowledge to make sure that the whole field ends up producing the type of research that is useful for them without disclosing what could mean what could represent a danger for them in their strategy to perpetuate themselves as intellectual monopolies. And a way to take stock of the ways in which these companies are knowledge predators is to compare the share of co-authored publications with the share of co-owned patents for whatever period of time and almost whatever company you want to speak about. When it comes to corporate power, if the companies publish papers, which depends a lot on the field, the industry where they are working, but if they do, like tech and pharma, but also other companies like Siemens does it very often, you can make this comparison and see, for instance, this is for Microsoft, almost 90% of Microsoft's papers between 2012 and 2021 had at least one co-author that was working for another organization, which means research developed together with other organizations. Whereas when it comes to patents and co-ownership of patents, only 1% of the patents had a co-owner, during that period. But this is only about research. A similar strategy can be found, as I was anticipating, in the for the open source communities and space, and I can then unpack more that idea. But let me now briefly go into investments, because this is something that is lately making the headlines. For long, these companies have been making investments as if they were venture capitalists. This form of corporate venture capital is not something like a one-shot, like Microsoft investing in OpenAI. If you see the table here, which corresponds to investments made by February 2024, what you can see is that among in the ranking of the largest investors in AI companies in terms of the number of companies that were receiving their investments, we have not only Microsoft, but also Google, Intel, Amazon, Nvidia. And more we see that this strategy of investing in other companies is not restricted only to AI startups. It's actually way broader to the different companies that are strategic for their control of the whole ecosystem. So for instance, Microsoft has also invested in a startup here from the UK that is called Nscale, which is, we can place it within the value chain, within data centers value chain. And there is also this other type of investment, which is particularly interesting, which is a leading corporation investing in another equity in another leading corporation. And we usually, when we do this analysis of global value chains, platform companies, we are very much focused on how they appropriate value, capture knowledge, how they are concentrating things. But in order to capture all that, you first need to have this network of actors that you can be having you can be making them produce value for you, produce knowledge for you. They need to exist. And for them to exist, you need to invest in them. Apple, for instance, to give you a different example, a global value chain example, when when we see how Apple extracts value from Chinese companies that assemble the iPhones like Foxconn and others, what is less known is that in order to have Foxconn producing in like city-size factories, Apple invested in Foxconn to make sure that Foxconn then had the capabilities and knew how to produce in a subordinated way for Apple. The same strategy, the same thing happens in the case of digital technologies. And it's not only about creating this periphery of actors that are producing value and knowledge for the leading corporations, but it's also about how you can make sure that the companies at the core remain at the core and remain profitable. And we can also actually say one other thing here, which is why. Why is it? It's not just an invest. So in the end, why is it that a company like Google or Microsoft will be investing in a startup company like OpenAI? Well, of course, the ultimate aim is that this company will be participating, joining their ecosystem in a subordinate position. But even if it doesn't, by investing in these companies, and Amazon, Microsoft, or Google get privileged access to the knowledge that the startups are developing and can also steer that knowledge. So it's also another way in which they can set the research and development agenda in the digital field while getting privileged access to ultimately what every relevant actor is doing. But then it comes the cherry on the cake, which actually is the cake, which is the cloud. Because sometimes even these startups don't receive money. They just receive the opportunity to use the cloud for free up to a certain amount of money. And ultimately, the aim is that all these startup companies will be participating and developing their software on the cloud. Because the cloud is not only infrastructure as a service, it's not only a place where, as you know, the models are trained or data is stored, it's also a platform, a marketplace. And here you have an example from how Amazon Web Services marketplace looks like. And this supermarket of technologies is actually more than a supermarket of technologies, because inside the cloud, digital technologies are produced, exchanged, and consumed. So this means that actually this is a unique economic space, an economic space where not only you can exchange digital services, but actually where all the digital services are being produced and manufactured in an entangled, intertwined way. And the only one that has the whole picture of who is producing what and doing what and knows how all the different pieces can come together will be, in this case, AWS, or in other examples, Microsoft or Google, because the three companies together concentrate around 65% of the cloud global market. And in this story, I think that artificial intelligence ends up being a sort of Trojan horse. Why a Trojan horse? Because in the end of the day, it really doesn't matter if AI delivers or not. We may probably in this call will share the idea that AI is to some extent is being presented as a solutionist, as a solution for everything. There is a techno solutionist discourse behind AI, a huge one, and that AI is even going to, let's say, solve the ecological crisis, cure cancer, and so on and so forth. It really doesn't matter in the end of the day, because organizations from all sizes and all sectors are migrating to the cloud, in part driven by this need to adopt AI. And for these companies, AI is not the business. Of course, they will also be having their own AI models, but the real business is to have everyone building technology, developing, exchanging, consuming digital technologies on their clouds. And here, this is why saying that AI will get more accessible and it will be commodified. And he says that in a very happy way, cheerful way, because definitely for him, this is not the business. The business is to really have everyone on the cloud. And when we say everyone, this also includes governments. For instance, here the UK has signed a 5-year agreement with Microsoft for its digital transformation. And the important thing here is that what we are talking about when we think about digital technologies, and I will be wrapping up with that in one more slide, digital technologies are control technologies. Digital technologies enable governance, enable an organization to govern others, enable a government to not only conduct its everyday operations, but also govern others. And for governing, it's not just about the need of data and information, but also information technologies to process that. So for instance, leading corporations like Siemens, which are also intellectual monopolies themselves, and I could have placed here any other leading corporation, including companies like Netflix, that is fully inside AWS cloud. These companies accept to be technologically dependent on technologies provided as black boxes by companies like Amazon, Microsoft, and Google in order to have the frontier technologies to extract even more value and knowledge from those that are further down in their spheres of control. So in this case, in the case of Siemens, this will be states as the customers, but also hospitals and even the subcontractors in their global value chain, because for organizing the global value chain, they will be using information systems and other technologies that are purchased as a black box service from the cloud, from Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. So just to wrap up, I think that we should see digital as today's control technologies, and this leads us to place the and also our analysis about digital technologies within a longer tradition where information and communication technologies have already been conceptualized as ways of controlling in the workplace, also to exercise control one country over others, or core countries over dependent countries, peripheral countries in the case of dependency theory. And from that perspective, what is new? What is different? I think that this idea of control beyond ownership synthesizes part of what is different, in the sense that today we have all these structures of or layers of corporate power where it's not just using technologies to control your own workers, but ultimately Amazon, Microsoft, and Google are designing technologies, and the startup companies selling inside their clouds are following the rules to design technologies that then will be used to control workers that are not directly hired by an Amazon or Microsoft or a Google, but will then, through these structures of power, end up creating value that through Siemens is paid to Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. There is also a specific dimension of control when we think of digital, which is the fact that as much as Amazon, for instance, can target us individually as consumers and exercise a customized control of the consumers, persuading us to purchase this thing or this other thing, the same type of technologies are being used in the workplace, not only as a form of algorithmic management, for instance, by companies from the gig economy like Uber, but also other companies that were not originally tech companies are also using these technologies. So there is a way of controlling workers that is specific of digital, that is tailor-made, because the technology enables you to track the specific data of each and every worker, and that can also be done beyond ownership. So IKEA can design the digital technologies that will be defining the key performance indicators and tracking the work that is done by the employees of the franchise of the companies that operate IKEA franchisees, for instance. Another difference regards how science and technology, big paradigm shifts are taking place. So here, I think that we need to I will make a very fast comparison. If we think of the first wave of ICT technologies, they are very much planned by DARPA, by the US Department of Defense, or ultimately the US government. Today, the AI that we get is the AI that Amazon, Microsoft, and Google want ultimately. And they are exercising a form of epistemic totalitarianism beyond anything that has been seen before. We know stories, for instance, of biopiracy. We know that science has been, or the mainstream methods of doing science have been sidelining every other forms of knowledge. But today what we are seeing is a new episode of this, a new chapter, with AI being pushed to become a method of invention for everything. It doesn't matter what you want to do, you need to do it using AI. And the final point, and with this I finish, is the idea of twin extractivism, because this dynamic that I've been describing here is a dynamic where not only there is a systematic extraction of different intangibles turned into assets by intellectual monopolies in particular, but those coming from tech, but also that digital technologies and intangibles have a materiality. And this materiality, in the form of, among others, data centers, is a way to reinforce nature extractivism. And I can further unpack this, but just to say one word to wrap up, because it's been way more than 20 minutes. The ways data centers do not create jobs, do not create structural transformations in the local economies where they are installed, but they do consume tons of water, of energy. They destroy local environments and communities. So they are deeply harmful, while at the same time they serve at the purpose of further expanding intangibles extractivism. So this white twin extractivism to emphasize the idea of nature and knowledge extractivism reinforcing each other or taking place together. Thank you. And this is just some publications, more political ones, one of my first books, and then the book that is coming later this year about these topics.
Thank you so much, Cecilia. Yeah, really, this framework is super helpful and powerful. I have a first question because I feel like I want to just hear maybe a little more from you. And if folks have other questions, feel free to write them in chat or raise your hand. But I just wanted to kick us off asking about kind of your research methodology. Like, I really loved some of the like charts that you brought in and some of the ways that you looked at like co-authored papers and patents. Like, can you tell us a little bit more about your methods and how they're unique or how they've been able to give you this like, yeah, the evidence for some of the claims?
Yeah, I think thanks, Val. So actually, one thing, I think that probably it's because I come from economics, where you always need to come with empirics. And if you come and say these companies are appropriating co-developed knowledge, they will say, no, and if you showcase an example, like earlier today, I was talking to someone from the BBC, and I was giving the example of how actually AstraZeneca vaccine was in fact developed by Oxford, by the University of Oxford. But then a lot of people don't even know that. They just think it's AstraZeneca, the one that developed the vaccine. And no, AstraZeneca is the one profiting from the vaccine. And it's true that in the UK and part of Europe, the commitment was that AstraZeneca, by doing the clinical trials and then manufacturing the vaccine, was going to sell cheaper. But when you look at the price in the rest of the world, they were compensating for the cheaper price by selling at higher prices elsewhere. And this, again, was not the company that developed the vaccine, and this was a pandemic time. But if you just go and explain this case in detail, they will say you're cherry picking. They will say, like the people that still believe that these leading corporations deserve to be profiting more and paying lower taxes because they are the innovators, will still tell you, no, but you are choosing the example that fits your what you want, your narrative or your discourse. So I really wanted to map in the most comprehensive way and with the data available the extent to which these companies were controlling large portions of our society, and how it was not just at one case here and there, how this was way larger than, let's say, the tobacco companies in the past, paying a few researchers here and there to say smoking is great and doesn't generate cancer. And how sophisticated this is as well. Because, of course, corporate power learns. They still do a lot of lobby, but they do it in ways that are much more sophisticated. And part of this story came from the fact that I realized that I needed to find some data that was not just the outcome of the process. Because if you just look into patent data, you only look at the appropriators. So with this hypothesis in mind, that these companies were capturing for themselves research, innovation, developments, you name it, that was actually being developed by many others, the first thing that honestly came to my mind was scientific papers. What if they published papers? And I checked and I realized that they were publishing not only dozens or hundreds, thousands of papers. So I could definitely do an analysis of who their collaborators were by looking at who they were co-authoring with. I guess this might also come from the fact that my PhD was about and how differently it was impacting universities from core and peripheral countries. So I already knew that that scholars were frequently not only just receiving money from the companies, which could have been another approach, and I've explored that for other pieces of research, for instance, related to pharma, but also how they were directly co-developing, co-producing, co-creating the knowledge with the companies and everything that came from that onwards. And then I guess it was also through that same logic that very early on I realized that the companies were not simply acquiring startups, but also investing in startups. The first companies that I observed with this type of behavior were Chinese ones. I started reading reports. Like I read a lot of reports of those reports that are written for business people, and I saw that both Alibaba and Tencent were investing in startups. So then I thought a, actually a broader strategy. And then for another piece of work, actually, you were saying that you were looking into blockchain. Another thing that we did with two colleagues was to look into uh, who was investing in the companies that were part of the blockchain ecosystem. And this was published in a chapter in Spanish for a different thing, but all this again resonated to me. And the more I thought about it, the more my way of thinking about how capitalism works as hierarchical networks where value is co-produced, but not just as a flat network, but as a hierarchy, and also the same in terms of the knowledge co-production, and also as planned networks that are not just like coming out of thin air or just personal connections, but also that have a direction. These methodologies just in a way fit for what I wanted to do. But there are also a lot of accidental things like, I don't know, I did a postdoc at a lab that was on science and technology studies. And that was accidental. It was not something that I choose. I mean, now looking backwards, it was the best thing that could have happened to me. But I was supposed to go to an econ lab, but then there were internal fights among the scholars, and I was like accidentally with one team, and that team was losing power. So the director of the research lab said, even though I was coming with my money, he said, we don't want her. So I was like, oh no, I have this money and a job that I could be doing in Paris. Where will I go? And the STS people like said, you're welcome, come here. So yeah, a lot of accidents and things like that happen as well.
So cool. Thank you. Patcon, go for it.
Thanks. Oh man, yeah, STS. I feel I'm so curious what school was that? This is my real question, but where did you study STS or where
Where
was
the STS, it's well, in France they change the institutions all the time. So at that
oh,
time, it was Paris Diderot, Paris 5, and the
okay.
lab is called CEPED. So a center for is Centre d'économie et population. No, Centre de. I'm very bad at remembering names, but it's about a study center for population and development, something like that.
Okay, cool. I'm just curious. I've just had a small bit
But
of
if you want to really trace where that comes from, the director is called Rikas Arvanitis, and he studied with Calon and Latour. So it comes from the
okay.
actual network theory people.
Oh, okay, cool. And I guess this is like bordering. Maybe it's like I'm hoping you have some. I'm worried this maybe isn't a question, but you made me excited about. I think trying to. Essentially, I find myself. I work around machine learning for understanding the kind of like some tools. A tool called Polis that like originally was about finding making sense. Using machine learning to help us make sense of the relationships between people and information, but not like doing manage like it's not like going in and trying to make sense of the information for us. It's just helping us make sense of our affinity. Like I agree or disagree with things. And it's really interesting that they're one of the like I kind of like worked around a player that like was focused on this for a very long time, very early. But then when the LLM people came around, there's this I think they're like, oh my god, we're destroying democracy, we're destroying the workforce, we all need our pet democracy projects, and they essentially just like started partnering. And basically it's like I can just see the way that this shift happened. This group that was kind of doing something that was pretty uh, basic and didn't need all this high technology or frontier models, they essentially just like got like they're struggling for money and they just got peppered with a lot of money. And I don't know, their shift slowly moved towards like large language
There
models
was
and like data
absolutely a
scientific.
move towards that. There was a move to scale, but that comes, I would say, it's not just LLMs. It comes from 2012 when it was clear that if you could feed an algorithm with more and more data and train the model with like more processing power, the accuracy of the predictions would be better. And
Yeah.
that, from a business standpoint, was very tempting. And it was in particular tempting for large tech companies, platform companies. Why? Because they already had all the data. They were sitting on the data. They were already doing machine learning. I mean, they were already trying to make the most from that data. So, and they already had a lot of money available. Whereas
Yeah.
at the same time, like for my forthcoming book with Verso, I did over 100 interviews, or I interviewed AI scientists, AI engineers, R&D directors, and so on from 55 multinational corporations, not only big tech, but also from other companies to map the dependencies, to understand how the concrete captures were taking place among big companies, because that you cannot see it through papers or other things. So, and in that
Mm.
research, one of the things that came clear was that a lot of people that I was interviewing used to be scholars that then
Mm.
migrated to like decided to they were brain drained to the companies. And the reasons, like typically people would think, okay, this is because of the money, and of course the paycheck mattered, but it was not the only reason. It was also because they had all the resources
Mhm.
without needing to apply for them, which is what we have to do at the
Yeah.
university, and then wait and see if we get them. So is you have all the data, you have all the also have all the processing power, and you have the other talented people. At one
Mm.
point, there was a moment when a network effect also took place. You just like as big companies were dismantling research laboratories from the universities, if you just wanted to keep on working with the best people in your field, you just needed to go and work in the company or with a double affiliation or with a collaboration writing a paper. So all
Yeah.
those things were things that I also explored about how, like in the same data set that I analyzed, the like top 14 AI conferences and how things evolved between 2012 and 2020. What I also looked at was at the double affiliations. So the people that were at the same time for the same paper saying that they were at
Yeah.
let's say like Jan LeCun until recently, Meta chief AI scientist and NYU professor, because their role matters a lot as well in tightening the network, in
Mm.
deciding who knows what, because their non-disclosure agreements prevent them from really saying what they are doing at Meta in the case of Jan LeCun, whereas there is no non-disclosure agreement that prevents him from saying all the things that they are doing at the university or from making the university do complementary research or things that will definitely then feed into the other things that they are doing. So even if they were, I'm not saying that they had a plot, that they were like, oh, let's conquer everything and control everything, but actually the beneath the narrative of collaboration, creating a system, all working together. And because a lot of these people also came from academia, for the people that stayed in academia, they were their pals, the people they had studied with also. In the beginning, this was a small field also. And this is why I think the degree of capture ended up being so big, not only because of the money, not only because of the paycheck to the scientists, but also because of the methodologies that were used and because of the network, the relations, the tight relations among the
I would
people.
say the rate of change too. Like it's like, oh, like you had to get the outcomes in academia, you had to publish, and that pace just no longer made sense because like people were just publishing things unless wrong and like that and getting all the feedback from their peers that way. Or I don't know. Yeah, that is so neat though. I thank you for
Well, it's very
it's so
fast to the
like
point that they don't publish. I mean, when you think of the difference, when, for instance, I did a similar study for pharma, for healthcare and biomedical sciences, actually, and in terms of the research agenda, what the agenda was about, and how it was captured by big pharma, and I did it also with biologists, which was amazing because they had all this knowledge about like really, oh no, this is about like molecular biology, this is cancer, this is that. And there is a difference there. There, we looked at highest impact factor journals because in the case of that field is what matters the most. But in the case of AI, because it moves so fast, also they don't even bother publishing. I mean, they do publish, of course, in journals every now and then. They put everything in Arxiv and these repositories. But it's the conferences that will tell you this is the frontier. These are the best papers, the ones that, by the way, win a prize that was decided among the organizers of the conference, which in a large extent, are the same people from the companies, by the way. Francesca, I think if you want to jump in.
Yes, thank you. It was super interesting. I work on the environmental implications of AI. That's my Marie Curie about, and I use the same approach because I'm a network scientist by background. But the thing I actually see as different from other corporate power is the dynamic that they are building in terms of dependency with the state. And I wonder if you can elaborate on that, because I understand the idea really of this entrepreneurial state kind of Mazzucato idea that there are also co-investors that are not profiting from that investors. But here, instead, we're building a complete dependency of the public sector on the private infrastructure,
Absolutely.
which is a problem not just in terms of safety and security, but I have the feeling is a problem in terms of I can unplug it anytime if I want to. I can unplug an entire country if I'm a company with,
Absolutely.
or I can apply the same logic of the tariffs somehow. And so I wonder if you see this as a very peculiar feature of this 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 sector, let's call it sector, because I find it different from pharma or from oil and gas. No?
I think they are definitely, I mean, it's a bit of what I was saying. I will just go back to my slides 1 second because I have them there and I have a few slides about things. I always keep slides after the thank you of questions that I think people may ask. And among those, I have this one, which in a way summarizes my take on why states subordinate. I work at the same lab, but I'm definitely not someone working within the entrepreneurial state framework, just to clarify. But I think that the states subordinate for many reasons. So I just to put them all here, and they're different degrees of relevance for different countries. So on the one hand side, I think that states subordinate because governing requires data and information. And these companies are the ones that have the information technology. So they got convinced also in part, of course, this is part, there has been a crafted narrative, but even the governments like the Brazilian government that has been trying to do independent things end up accepting that if they want to have the technologies that they believe are needed to run a hospital, to run the public administration, to whatever, they need to accept some degree of dependence. And this is because, in part, governments, although there is a lot of investment in research and development, public research and development, it has been within the networks that I was describing. So yes, there has been a lot of money put into developing AI science and technology, if you want, or digital science and technology broadly, publicly, but that ends up being captured within the networks that I was describing. So you have the startups that are either will be acquired or will become dependent. Either they get the money directly to invest or they end up anyway developing their solutions on the cloud. So you create alternatives, but those alternatives end up being captured. So then the company arrives and they tell you, this is the solution. It's actually plugged to the things that you already have from us, because Microsoft does that very often because all the governments depend on Microsoft Office, for instance. So, and they also push, and they push with other strategies like an AI-driven growth promise. And I've seen this firsthand because I've been discussing with many governments from Latin America and Europe, and they are all trapped with the narrative of growth, that they need to unlock growth, competitiveness, whatever. And AI will bring this magic tool, like AI is the silver bullet that will solve everything. So because of that, although they know that they are trading in principle, sovereignty for growth, but they will not get the growth, actually. They accept it. They accept that this is the rule of the game, and this is a Starmer. The UK has been definitely this. They bend the knee and say, yes, we want the tech deal, we want the investment, we are going to bring growth and competitiveness because growth is the priority for this government. And of course, there are also governments that become dependent, like Israel, because they use it for, in the case of Israel, the genocide in Gaza, but for warfare more generally. So let's also say that it's not that the states are the good guys and the companies are the bad guys, because for surveillance, police surveillance more general, etc., these companies are the ones that bring the technology. And this also includes green tech. And this is the other thing that I wrote a paper recently about this with a colleague that is called Cecilia Rikap. And here we analyze the strategies of, in particular, Google and Amazon in relation to this idea of like the green technologies and the twin transition and so on. And of course, we argue that in part it is AI solutionism, and that is used to make governments divert their attention from the ecological footprint of these technologies. But also it's more than that. It's also a way to render states more dependent, because the main clients of all these technologies that sometimes are offered for free, sometimes are offered directly with a fee. If they are first offered for free, eventually they will be charged, and so on, will be states. And there are a bunch of things. And you can clearly see, in particular for the case of Google, that there is a strategy, a clearly defined plan to set the terms of the transition, the ecological transition, that they assume that there will be an ecological transition and it's up, and that they want to be the ones deciding how the transition will take place. And basically, and I will stop sharing, basically the way that for Google is a transition in which they are the only ones that control all the information and all the data necessary for the transition and the technologies, and then they decide what pieces of that is seen by whom, from the individual that will use Google Maps to know the best route with their car, to spend less fossil fuel, to the government that will see, for instance, with Tapestry, which is this digital twin of the electric grid, will see how to do more it's like smart energy provision and so on and so forth. And they will also be the ones that provide the indicators, not only to the governments, but also to international organizations like the UN, to map and measure the degree of harm of the environment, etc., and so on and so forth. And this I think it's critical what you are looking at, and the degree of capture. And indeed, the degree of capture is different because these are the essential technologies that are used for governing in a way. And this is why my new book is called The Rulers also. It's because I'm making this point of these companies are the ones in control ultimately, because if your capacity to govern depends on their decision to switch on or switch off, then you are complete. And even if it's not just switch on and off, it's also about the fact that they are already deciding how you govern by deciding the technologies that you're using that influence you in the ways what you see and what you don't see. It's not techno-feudalism, Steve. I don't know if that's your question, but you can come in and I will say why. Although I'm very close friend with Cecilia.
Okay, good. Yeah, say why, since my other question is too long for the time I've left.
It's not, for many reasons. Why? Because rents have been intrinsic to capitalism historically. It's just that they were not so prominent in the global north. This is why for a lot of people from core countries, they don't see it. But peripheral countries like Latin America, in Latin America, capitalism has historically been about rent extraction and redistribution of rent to certain parts of capital that were not capable of competing internationally. So the role and is not just about ground rent, it's also about intellectual rents, because the dependency theory already in the 50s and 60s was explaining how the unequal exchange was explained by peripheral countries paying for the technological monopolies of the core. So there is already a history of the ways in which rent redistribute the value that is captured globally in capitalism. I think that techno-feudalism is also a bad strategy from a leftist point of view.
So you're saying techno-feudalism is an acyclic graph.
I'm saying that saying techno-feudal is very catchy. It convinces. I mean, it's good from a marketing perspective, clearly, and I think that it conveys a message, but it's not conceptually accurate, and politically, I also don't think it's the best strategy. But at the same time, I become a very flexible person politically, in the sense that I understand that if people want to call it techno-feudalism and that helps them understand that there is something deeply wrong here, then okay. But to be fully honest, I think that the risk politically is that some people may think, okay, the problem is not capitalism. The problem is that capitalism is not working as it was working before, because this is no longer capitalism. This is feudalism, and feudalism is wrong. So once we correct for this and that, we will again be living in a very nice world. And that very nice world, even the golden years, again, they were golden years for a part of the world. Most of the world was not living golden years during that time, was creating value that was feeding into the golden years of the other part of the world. So I think that once we see history from a broader lens, it also helps us understand that this might also be something new, might be an extreme form of capitalism, a degradation of part of the competitive levers that capitalism used to have, might be many things, but ultimately this is deeply wrong. And this is why I'm okay. If we want to call it techno-feudalism, let's call it techno-feudalism, as long as we realize that this is so wrong, also because it's undermining our capacity to do it better and do it differently and to change it. Because the more we use generative AI, the less people think, the less creative thinking, and therefore the less capacities to collectively realize that this is deeply wrong, should be transformed, and should be transformed completely. So yeah, this is why I'm flexible with the names. If you ask me the question, I reply, but you will not see, for instance, in my book, a sort of claim against techno-feudalism or anything like that. It's fine.
Well, thank you so much, Cecilia. This was very, very exciting and enriching presentation and discussion. So thank you, everyone. And we are at time, so I'm gonna have to be the bad guy and shut us down. But there are more questions for you, Cecilia. So I'm wondering where could be a good place for us to continue. If you are interested in joining us on Slack, we usually do a debrief in Slack.
I
But
don't
if
have a
not,
Slack. I'm so sorry. And I'm very strict with not opening up more like social media communication channels. But I'm more than happy to either like meet again at another time that works better for everyone, like in a few months, or yeah, or people can email me with the questions, or you can, if you centralize that on the Slack, you can send them to me and I can point to like some short answers. I don't know, find
okay,
some other way.
perfect.
But I'm sorry, the
Yeah, I
Slack,
will.
I won that battle with my students also, which I'm very proud of. That before we
We're
used to
proud
have a
of you.
Slack channel at UCL, like for the master's students, and I simply didn't open my Slack account. And one day they realized it wasn't there. I was like, no, we have other communication channels. So now I
No
cannot
problem.
have a
I'm
Slack.
all for boundaries. Boundaries are important. So thank you for honoring yours. And yeah, I will just email you the questions and you can send me reply to email and then I'll bring your answers over into the Slack so people can see them, if that sounds good. So yeah,
Brilliant.
thank you. If everyone will do what we always do, which is unmute and give our speaker a round of applause, we can close out after that. So thank you, Cecilia. Everyone unmute, send her some love.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. And thanks for having me. Pleasure meeting you all through the screen.
Yes. Have a great rest of your day, everyone, and see you in Slack, but not you, Cecilia.
Bye.
Thank you all. Thank you,
Bye,
Michelle.
everyone.